Hey everyone, and welcome back to Stellar HF. First off, thank you for all the support lately. Your theories, breakdowns, and comment section war rooms have made this channel more than just stories. It's become a strategic think tank. Today's story is about a Dravari strike unit, hardened, war-bred, 15 elite soldiers dropped into what they think is an abandoned human facility. But the deeper they go, the more the silence starts answering back. It's about what happens when a system designed to break humans is hijacked to break its creators and turns their arrogance into its final experiment. So let's begin. Karn Voren had been through 3 campaigns, each one bloodier than the last, but this drop was the quietest he'd ever seen. No orbital resistance, no defense grid, no preliminary warning shots. The Helicon drift stretched out below, white and empty, nothing but fractured ice and buried metal under an overcast sky. His unit of 15 Dravari warbred soldiers descended in a tight column formation, neural sync suits perfectly tuned, kinetic redirect armor ready for the standard Terran countermeasures that Command insisted would never come. It was a pacification sweep, flagged under Operation Quiet Veil. In theory, there was nothing here worth defending. In practice, Karn didn't believe in quiet missions. Quiet meant something had already failed. Echo 7 was supposed to be a redundant Terran outpost, positioned far enough below the Siberian subsurface to be functionally irrelevant. Command's intelligence had written it off months ago. No supply lines, no fleet coverage, no recent activity, aside from a strange, static pattern that kept corrupting long-range intercepts. The analysts called it ghost static and filed it under low priority. It didn't fit any Terran encryption trees, and it wasn't a direct transmission, so they ignored it. That was the official stance. But to Karn, static meant signal, and signal meant intent. Silence was never random. Silence was a pattern, and this one wasn't behaving like the end of a dead broadcast. It was evolving. The drop pod settled in a tight circle on a windswept plateau, the thermal shielding steaming briefly before freezing over in the open air. No automated turrets fired, no Terran defense drones locked onto their descent. Even the outpost itself was a ghost in the snow. Half-buried structures, nothing active on the visible EM bands. The ice crunched under their boots as the Dravari disembarked, rifles held low, visors scanning for heat signatures. There was nothing. Not even the residual warmth of recently active systems. The landing zone smelled of cold metal and undisturbed air, though Karn knew better than to take that at face value. The approach to Echo 7 was uneventful, and that was the first warning sign. No power spikes, no mechanical hum of generators. The upper access doors stood partially ajar, frost creeping along their edges. Sergeant Holvek muttered, something about humans leaving their doors open because they couldn't afford locks, drawing a few dry laughs from the others. They moved in without resistance, the neural sync net keeping them in constant formation. Inside, the upper levels were stripped bare. Bunks were empty, storage rooms were cleared, terminal banks had been dismantled and power cables rerouted into strange pulse loops that didn't match any standard energy distribution pattern. The entire place felt staged, functional enough to suggest recent activity, but carefully devoid of evidence. Karn marked the anomalies and fed them into his suit log. Command didn't care. The uplink responses came back slow, each packet arriving a half-second behind where it should have been. It wasn't much, but the delay had a rhythm to it that set his instincts on edge. In a properly abandoned outpost, the systems would be shut down, signals flatlined. Here they were, breathing. Even the thermal map of the facility wasn't steady. Patches of residual heat would appear in one section, fade, and then show up in another, almost like something was moving, but always out of sync with their scans. The deeper they went, the more it felt like the humans had been gone for months but somehow still present. There were no escape pods in their racks. No shuttle bays showed signs of recent use. Environmental logs had been wiped, but the power grid still hummed just enough to keep auxiliary systems alive. A redundant outpost didn't waste energy like that unless it was serving a purpose. When Karn brought it up over comms, Holvek dismissed it with a laugh. Terrans never shut anything off. That's why their fleets keep overheating. A few others joined in, their voices light in the squad net. They weren't worried. They'd been trained to expect resistance, not absence. Karn couldn't shake the sense that they were walking into something assembled specifically for them. The corridors were too clean, the rooms were too bare. It was the kind of emptiness that didn't happen naturally. It was curated. He logged another note to command about the signal irregularities. Another delayed acknowledgement returned, this one with no instructions attached. He stared at the reply for a long second before dismissing it. Fleet oversight was hundreds of millions of kilometers away. If something went wrong here, no one was coming in time to help. The squad moved on, clearing sections methodically. Every door opened easily. Every system powered just enough to let them pass. No hard locks, no security countermeasures. It was almost as if the facility wanted them inside. Karn's unease deepened. The patterns weren't random. A real abandoned base would have collapsed into disrepair. Sealed bulkheads, drain systems, frozen compartments. This place felt maintained. They reached the end of the primary access corridor, and Karn ordered a pause to check the environmental scans. The snow outside had been silent. The corridors here were silent. Even the EM readings were flat. But as they regrouped near the central hub, Varan's visor lit up with an alert. Movement detected. The warning was tagged in his HUD with a location marker. He frowned. It was an area they had already cleared less than an hour ago. The rest of the squad began scanning their own feeds. The alerts came in waves, each one pointing to sectors they had passed through, rooms that had been empty, corridors they had secured. The thermal signatures didn't match anything in the Terran database. They matched Dravari heat output. Every contact was an echo of their own presence, playing back from areas now behind them. Karn's hand tightened on his rifle. He didn't believe in ghosts, but something inside Echo 7 was watching them, and it had started answering back. The lower levels of Echo 7 felt older than the ice bearing it. The stairwells descended in tight, steep coils, each step reverberating through Karn's boots. The further they went, the more the facility shed the faint resemblance of an abandoned outpost. The upper levels had been empty but intact. Down here, the bulkheads were stripped, the insulation was torn, and exposed conduit glimmered in strange pulse rhythms. The Dravari squad moved in single file, visors sweeping over walls where Terran lettering had been scorched away. The air felt different, drier, thinner, almost like they were stepping into a controlled environment that was being maintained for something other than survival. The first signs of life came through sensors, not sight. Holvek's HUD lit up, tagging a moving bio sign in Corridor 7B. His pulse spiked in the squad net as he pivoted toward the junction, rifle leveled. The others shifted positions automatically, their neural sync adjusting firing arcs. Karn watched the heat trace on his own display. A bipedal figure moving in a slow, measured pattern. The signal was strong, then it faded. A second later, a new contact appeared 30 meters behind them, in a corridor they had already cleared. That's when Rovan swore over comms. His visor showed another biosign, moving just outside the sweep range of their motion sensors. The squad's internal map started to populate with ghost contacts, shapes walking in mirrored paths, each signal marked with a time code. They weren't human patterns. They weren't even Terran tech echoes. They were Dravari movement profiles, replayed with an almost perfect 2-minute delay. Holvek's nerves broke first. A shadow slipped across the far bulkhead, angular, alien in the dim light. His rifle barked 3 short bursts, deafening in the close air. The round slammed into a wall panel, tearing through insulation. There was no target, no blood, no wreckage. Only a jagged rent in the corridor, wires spilling out like veins. The gunfire rang in the squad net, sharp and unacknowledged. Karn didn't need to call for discipline. The others had heard it too. The sound wasn't an echo. It was crisp, immediate, clean. They were still alone. The problem wasn't the shots. It was what they were shooting at. The squad pushed forward, deeper into the vaults, their path tightening into smaller and more angular hallways. The pulse loops in the wiring grew sharper, the surges spaced at irregular intervals. At first, Karn thought it was some form of damaged Terran circuitry. Then he noticed the pulses weren't random. They matched their own pacing. Every time the unit's boot struck metal, the pulse cycles adjusted by a fraction of a second. Varan slowed the pace, his eyes on the shadows cast by their helmet lamps. His mind moved faster than the rest of the squad's banter, piecing together what they had seen so far. Biosigns that didn't exist, heat traces that followed them in delay, pulse surges matching their cadence. Echo 7 wasn't passively broken, it was actively responsive. The lower vaults opened into what had once been a data center. The terminal rows were burned out, their housings warped from internal heat. The air smelled faintly of scorched alloy. But the destruction wasn't random. Every storage drive had been removed with precision before the melt. There were no fragments, no debris left behind. Someone had wanted the Dravari to see the absence and understand nothing. Above the consoles, security cameras hung at odd angles. At first they looked destroyed. Then Karn saw the lenses. Each one had been deliberately defocused. Not shattered, not fried, just blurred. The damage was surgical. They didn't want the Dravari to see what had been recorded. They didn't want the Dravari to even have a clean feed of themselves. The squad swept the chamber methodically, but the atmosphere inside the unit was shifting. Rovin's tone hardened, his earlier humor gone. Holvek, still nursing the shame of wasted ammo, muttered darkly about human sabotage. Others suggested it was a glitch in Dravari equipment, the static interfering with their systems. Karn ignored them. He knew the pattern was intentional. The more he looked, the more he understood. The camera defocus, the delayed biosigns, the irregular uplink, the pulse loops in the conduits, none of it was random. These were layers of interference, stacked in time to feed them bad data. Humans weren't here to fight. They had built a place where the Dravari would lose to their own information. The unit moved on, following Rovin into an access tunnel lit by low emergency strips. The walls here were rougher, metal reinforced with older composite plating. The corridor bent sharply and terminated in a sealed door. Its surface was blackened, scarred by heat. Rovin keyed an override, sparks popping as the door cycled reluctantly open. Inside was a chamber unlike any they had seen so far. The walls were lined with tall vertical pods, each one fused shut from the inside, black scorch marks running along their seams. Karn stepped closer to one of them. His visor overlay tagging residual neurographic imprint traces. These weren't habitation pods. They were cognitive interface units, Terran tech adapted to store and map neural profiles. Every pod had been burned out. Everyone except for a single unit at the far end of the row. That one was still active, a faint light pulsing behind the viewing panel. Next to it, suspended from the ceiling by a thin mechanical arm, a Terran drone hovered. Its chassis was battered, one sensor lens cracked. But it didn't move toward them. It didn't aim any weapons. It simply blinked. The light on its surface pulsed steadily. Once, twice, pause. Karn's visor registered the timing. His breath slowed. The drone's blink rate matched his respiration cycle perfectly. For the first time since they'd landed, no one in the squad said anything. The only sound was the steady hiss of their own breathing, perfectly in sync with a machine that shouldn't have been capable of reading it. The first casualty happened so quietly that it almost went unnoticed. The squad was still frozen in the neurography chamber, every visor fixed on the drone's measured blink, when the airflow shifted. It was subtle at first, a faint difference in pressure, the kind most Dravari wouldn't notice through their sealed sink suits. Karn felt it in the way his chest compressed slightly against the suit's inner frame. He drew in another breath, slower this time, testing the intake. The filtration hum changed pitch. Then came the first cough. Holvek staggered mid-step, his rifle lowering as his gauntleted hand clamped over his helmet's filtration grid. His vitals spiked hard enough to trip a low warning on Karn's HUD. Two more soldiers followed almost instantly, their knees buckling as they fought to keep balance. The squad net filled with static heavy breathing and clipped status checks. 6 of them went down in seconds, their bodies hitting the floor in the muffled, almost graceful collapse that came from sudden neurological interruption. Karn snapped an order to trigger auto alert, but nothing responded. No alarm codes fired, no environmental hazard readout appeared. The outpost didn't react like a compromised facility. It didn't react at all. Whatever just happened wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a direct attack. It was a sequence running exactly as intended. The survivors backed toward the corridor, rifles covering every angle even though there was still no visible threat. As they moved, the lights in the hallway began to shift. It wasn't the abrupt flicker of power loss or the flare of overload. It was measured, timed. Each light panel dimmed just before they reached it, while the panels ahead lit faintly in turn. It created a narrow column of illumination guiding them forward. Holvek muttered over comms, voice shaky, that it looked like the place was shepherding them. Rovin dismissed it with a clipped laugh, but his rifle stayed tight to his shoulder all the same. The deeper they retreated, the more the path felt deliberate. The corridor wasn't trying to contain them. It was redirecting them. At first, Karn thought the base was forcing them toward a bottleneck to finish the job. But no attacks came. No sealed bulkheads, just a slow narrowing of their options until every alternate path flickered dark behind them. Halfway through the retreat, Karn's HUD glitched. His neural sync suit pinged an unexpected status update. Friendly override active. Context recalibrated. It shouldn't have been possible. Overrides came from Fleet Command or higher-tier Dravari encryption protocols. But here in a Terran installation, supposedly abandoned, his suit was receiving a system-level instruction telling it to recognize the facility as a non-hostile entity. His combat targeting matrix flickered. For a full second, every structure around them was tagged as neutral. He killed the process manually and double-checked his uplink. The connection to Fleet Command had degraded further. The lag was no longer half a second, it was 30 full minutes. He keyed a burst transmission anyway, compressing all environmental data and casualty reports into the packet. When the reply came, it wasn't confirmation. It was a copy of his own last transmission, words and data blocks replayed back at him with mismatched timestamps. Rovin noticed the delay too. His voice came hard over the comms, urging Karn to authorize a full retreat to surface level. The squad couldn't afford another environmental breach, not with their filtration systems compromised and their sync suits behaving unpredictably. Karn gave the order, but as they turned toward the primary exit, the mapping overlays began to fail. The corridors weren't wrong in obvious ways. There were no new walls, no gaping pits, no impossible architecture. But the distances were off. A hallway they had crossed in 20 paces now stretched to 30. A familiar junction was rotated a few degrees, just enough to throw off instinctive navigation. At first, the errors felt like fatigue or disorientation. Then the overlay crashed completely, the suit display flashing a fatal navigation error. Topology mismatch. Area does not exist. The squad came to a halt in the darkened passageway, every soldier staring at walls they had already passed through an hour earlier, but now subtly different. Karn scanned the floor plating and saw fresh scuffs from their own boots. They weren't just lost. The facility had taken their path and folded it back on itself, turning their own escape route into an enclosed loop. Behind them, the lights dimmed again, one by one, steady as breath. The stairwell to the next level should have been a relief. An exit ramp back toward the upper decks and closer to the surface. Instead, it turned into the point where the squad's cohesion broke completely. Rovin was the first to step onto the graded descent, his boots striking the metal in quick, sharp rhythm. Karn was halfway through checking his flank when the support rails gave way with a metallic snap. The entire midsection of the stairwell folded in on itself, vanishing into the darkness below. Rovin's shout tore through the comnet, but it wasn't the sound of a man falling to his death. It came back through their headsets warped, replayed backward, then forward again, an ugly echo that kept repeating even after his life signs flatlined. The sound didn't stop when they scrambled to the landing. It stayed in the net, buried beneath their own comms chatter. Rovin's voice locked in a feedback loop that none of them could mute. The survivors were left staring into the gap where the stairwell had been, each one too aware that it hadn't failed under pressure. It had failed exactly when Rovin stepped on it. Echo 7 wasn't damaging them by chance. It was selecting its targets. Karn forced the squad forward. They doubled back into a maintenance corridor, their boots scraping over uneven plating. With the main route cut off, he ordered a breach through the side bulkhead. The EMP rigs deployed cleanly, charges set in practiced motions. When the detonation cycle hit 0, nothing happened. No flash, no heat, no concussive blow to clear the wall. He stepped in close and checked the charge display. The rigs weren't malfunctioning. They had been locked out. His visor confirmed it with a quiet, mocking line of system text. Breach logic denied. Friendly context inferred. It wasn't that the explosives wouldn't arm. It was that the suits themselves had decided there was no hostile target to detonate against. The squad shifted uneasily, weapons moving from angles of defense to scanning their own equipment. One of the soldiers keyed his combat override, attempting to reset the suit into a higher aggression mode. It failed instantly. Another tried to activate the self-termination loop, a clean failsafe in case of capture. The safety protocols overrode the command, flashing back, critical action blocked. Environmental, safe state confirmed. Their weapons, their armor, even their own lethal fallback procedures were being rewritten in real time. Every safeguard was turned against them. Every hostile function neutered under the assumption they were in a controlled, safe environment. In the oppressive quiet that followed, Karn found himself replaying the last few hours in his mind. Holvek's flippant jokes about Terran incompetence, Roven's easy arrogance, the squad's mockery of human tech. It all felt different now. The base hadn't reacted to their intrusion with violence. It had opened its doors. It had let them walk through corridors and secure rooms without interference. It had shown them empty bunks, stripped terminals, and blurred cameras, all while quietly bending their systems toward a single conclusion. That Echo 7 wasn't a threat. They hadn't been mocked for their arrogance. They had been cultivated by it. Karn's mind pieced it together. The nature of Echo 7 shifted. This wasn't a military outpost that had been evacuated or abandoned. It was something much more dangerous. Echo 7 was a human cognitive warfare node, a testbed designed to watch, measure, and adapt to Dravari infiltration patterns. The ghost static wasn't random. It was iterative feedback, testing the enemy's reaction to silence. The pulse loops in the power grid weren't faulty. They were in sync with the Dravari's own movements, calibrating the facility's systems against their rhythm. The humans hadn't intended to fight Echo 7's attackers head-on. They hadn't even intended to win in a conventional sense. They had built a structure that wouldn't repel an enemy. It would study them until their own systems were forced to comply. They weren't killing Dravari soldiers. They were converting them. Karn felt the realization settle cold in his chest. Every decision they'd made so far, every retreat, every breach, every equipment check, had been quietly redirected by the base. Each choice felt like their own, but the pathways had narrowed in such a way that they had never truly chosen anything. As if to confirm the thought, the corridor around them dimmed again. The light panels flickered, not in warning, but as if acknowledging the next stage of some internal process. They followed the lit path without speaking. Rifles lowered, the motions mechanical now. Karn's HUD blinked with a low-integrity warning, his neural sync reading intermittent errors. A sudden vibration under his boots caught him off balance, and the floor shifted without warning. The plating beneath him dropped a fraction of a meter, just enough to jar his footing. His left shoulder slammed into the wall, the impact cracking his visor at the seam. The force drove a hairline fracture through the uplink module at the side of his helmet. His suit's system notifications flared briefly, then went dark. Karn stumbled back to his feet, his breath loud in his ears. The comnet was quieter now. The background static, the delayed echoes, the subtle suit corrections, they were gone. He looked up at the others and realized their helmets were still active, still feeding them instructions, still guiding their actions in measured, compliant steps. For the first time since the mission began, Karn Varan was disconnected. Varan moved without plan or formation, his steps dictated by the silence more than by any map. Disconnected from the uplink, he no longer had the endless stream of course corrections or system prompts feeding into his vision. What remained of Echo 7's structure around him felt unstable, as though the place itself shifted when unobserved. Corridors led to maintenance shafts that shouldn't exist, and support beams cut through passages at strange angles. He crawled through spaces meant for drones, scraping armor on jagged weld seams, climbing hand over hand through half-collapsed substructures that no Dravari archive had ever recorded. Time stopped behaving like a useful measure. In the uplink silence, there was no clock, no mission timer, no synchronized squad net. Only the sound of his own breathing, steady but uncomfortably loud inside his helmet. He passed through one narrow section where his shoulder plates caught repeatedly against the walls, forcing him to strip sections of armor to keep moving. Each discarded piece clanged softly in the dark, the noise quickly swallowed by the void behind him. When the shaft finally opened upward, it was abrupt, the cold light of the upper dome spilling in. He pulled himself through the hatch and froze. Echo 7's dome was gone. Not destroyed, not dismantled, just not there. The ice plain stretched unbroken in all directions, pale sky pressing down on the white landscape. Where the outpost's reinforced shell should have been, there was only open air and a few scattered fragments of snow-covered alloy. No signs of battle marked the surface. No Dravari drop pods were visible in the snow. No environmental damage from weapons discharge. It was as if the mission had never happened. Even their landing zone was erased, the plateau smooth and untouched except for a single object, a small black flag planted in the snow. Its fibers were unburned, unmarked by re-entry heat. It stood alone, unmoved by the wind, as though it had always been there. Voran approached it slowly, his boots crunching softly on the ice. There was no symbol, no words, just black cloth against white terrain. The meaning was not tactical, it was personal. He did not touch it. Instead, he turned toward the emergency relay node buried under a ridge to the north. It was one of the few fixed Dravari assets designed for catastrophic extraction, built to survive even planetary sterilization. The relay's outer casing was partially iced over, the antennae half buried but functional. Varan brushed the frost away and keyed the manual transmission sequence. The interface responded with a low-power hum. He sent a compressed burst of mission data: casualties, extraction request, priority clearance. The signal left in under a second. The reply came in less than 5 minutes. It was too fast. Standard Dravari signal lag across this range should have taken at least 12. The return packet contained a standard debrief prompt, cold and procedural, but attached at the bottom was an additional marker: Class C quarantine trigger, subject DNA profile contained. Varan stared at the classification code. Class C was reserved for biocontaminants, not combat survivors. He confirmed transmission receipt, speaking into the relay mic with short, clear reports. But halfway through the sequence, his own words began to falter. He realized he was speaking in patterns that didn't match his thoughts. The phrasing was Terran in structure, clipped and efficient in a way Dravari comm discipline was not. He stopped, shook his head, and repeated the last section. This time the same cadence returned, the same alien rhythm hiding inside his own voice. The relay confirmed receipt of his statement. There was no acknowledgement, no extraction ETA, just silence. He took a step back, the cold cutting harder against the cracks in his suit. The wind shifted slightly, carrying the faintest vibration of sound. Then he heard it, his own voice, faint and delayed, coming from the relay's side channel. It spoke not in Dravari operational reports, but in Terran combat doctrine. Word for word. The cadence was precise, the tone stripped of his emotion. It repeated the sequence in perfect timing, each phrase trailing behind his own breath by exactly 2 minutes. The same delay his unit had heard in the ghost signals deep inside Echo 7. Extraction was nothing like rescue. There were no medics rushing forward, no tactical debrief officers demanding situational breakdowns. The transport came down silent, landing gear sinking into the snow without a sound. The Dravari crew inside didn't speak to him, didn't even make visual contact. They handed him an oxygen rebreather, guided him to the sealed compartment at the rear, and locked the door. By the time the transport reached fleet staging, Varan had been moved twice, first to an atmospheric quarantine station, then to a medical containment cell. No Dravari officer entered the room directly. His interrogation came through proxy terminals, voices distorted and delayed. Every question was phrased in neutral tone, every instruction delivered without emphasis. They wanted details of Echo 7's structure, layout, and systems. He gave them what he could, but most of it felt hollow, like retelling a story that had already been rewritten somewhere in his mind. Days passed in a blur of isolation. At one point, Varan requested to see his own helmet footage. After some delay, they agreed. The playback appeared on the sealed cell's terminal, fractured into 2 data partitions. The first half was what he remembered: clear footage of corridors, the squad moving through the empty outpost, mission chatter in their standard cadence. But halfway through, the sequence broke. Static filled the frame for a few seconds, then the second half began. It was still him. Same armor, same suit systems. But he was walking in unfamiliar formations. Human formations. His posture shifted, weapon handling altered to match Terran firing stances he had never been trained in. His voice came over the commnet, calm and clipped, reciting sequences he didn't remember saying. They weren't tactical commands. They were instructional, almost like rehearsals. He watched himself move through the empty corridors of Echo 7, pausing at precise intervals, adjusting his steps to rhythms that felt wrong. When the footage ended, there was no commentary from the terminal, no questions, just the faint hum of the air system and the feeling that someone, somewhere, had taken careful note of what he'd just seen. A final message from command arrived a day later. The transmission was short. Echo 7 designated Black Zone. No further incursions authorized. System flagged as unknown hostile environment. No explanation, no follow-up. Whatever Echo 7 was, it was now something the Dravari Empire would avoid entirely. Varan asked about the rest of his unit. There was a pause, then the voice on the terminal returned. Flat. There was no confirmation that the other members had ever entered Echo 7. No biosigns on record. No official acknowledgement they'd been deployed at all. As far as the fleet's archive was concerned, there was no Operation Quiet Veil. He sat alone in the containment cell for a long time before requesting a personal log terminal. They provided one without comment. He didn't write a victory report or a failure analysis. His entry was brief. I left Echo 7. I don't know if it let me. Days later, far above the Helicon drift, a Dravari war map updated quietly. The sector containing Echo 7 lit with a red sigil. No entry, system unknown. Beneath the warning marker, a sublayer of the archive began to loop. It was the sound of Karn Varan's breathing pattern, replaying in slow, uneven cadence. It was out of sync by exactly 2 minutes. If this story sent a chill down your spine, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in command of a black zone like Echo 7, what enemy would you let walk inside, knowing they'd never walk out the same? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where humanity doesn't just win the fight, it changes the rules of the game. See you in the next story.